Every year, storefronts are flooded with games. And every year, most games slip through the cracks, deserving a lot more attention than they manage to receive. Giving a spotlight to indie games is something I've always loved doing on this channel, and with the year more than halfway over, and with most people probably done with the Elden Ring DLC at this point, I thought now would be a good time to highlight some absolute bangers you should grab between major releases. Usually I try to aim for the most obscure titles imaginable, but my scale for what's truly obscure and what isn't is probably a little off now after doing this for so many years. So I think I'll relax the usual less than 100 Steam reviews criteria in favor of games I just haven't seen talked about as much as they should have been. So with that out of the way, let's dive into a bunch of indie games you probably might have missed. I'm not sure how many people know this about me, but Morrowind is my favorite Elder Scrolls game by a pretty wide margin. Its indifference to the player and how they exist in the world, while giving them lots of options for freedom of exploration and interactions with its systems, is something that's been long since lost with Bethesda's flagship franchise. That's where Dread Delusion comes in. As soon as I saw it on the Steam front page, I knew it was a game I had to play, and I'm so glad I was right about its vibe. Low poly PS2 era graphics with a vibrant palette layered over a dark fantasy world is something special, and just for good measure throws in some truly grotesque character design. Not since Breath of the Wild have I just sat down and played a game non-stop until completion. I clocked over 20 hours playtime in just the span of a few days. From opening sequence to credits, I was absolutely enamored with the game. Something I sorely miss from the days of Morrowind is a game just giving you a quest with a vague sense of direction on where to go. No map markers, just some clues with landmarks in the world. And that's an experience Dread Delusion delivers on. While it may not be a playstyle for everyone, to me it's how open world games should be designed. Make a handful of major points of interest, surrounded by dozens of smaller landmarks that allow the player to memorize and navigate a space, without the constant need of map checking or reliance on an arrow telling you where to go. While it does have the advantage of the world not being obscenely overscaled like a lot of modern open world games, it is large enough that you can still spend a decent amount of time just wandering around exploring on your own volition to see what you can uncover. And that's where most of my time with Dread Delusion was spent, just uncovering every nook and cranny to see what was there, which leads into another strength of the game. Its leveling system. For decades now, leveling in RPGs for the most part has been determined by doing an action multiple times. If you want to level combat, you go out and fight a bunch of mobs. If you want to level stamina, go around and press jump dozens of times. This grind of skills will always have its place within games. That gameplay loop, when done well, is so satisfying. The issues arise when most games don't wind up doing it well. A more modern solution is using a currency you can lose upon concurrent deaths, as popularized by the Soul series. Distributing and building a character how you see fit depending on the equipment you find and want to use in the moment, giving you something to work towards. Dread Delusion approaches it in a way I personally haven't seen before, which is quest and exploration based. Scattered around the world and locked behind quests are these skulls called Delusions. Finding one will increase your progress to a new level, which then gives you a point to spend on one of 4 different stats. This streamlined approach may feel like a step backwards, but honestly, it forced me to explore and take on quests I may not normally have done. I wanted to go everywhere and work my way through every possible story because I knew the reward would at least in some capacity be worth it overall. The downside of the game, unfortunately, is the combat. It does lean a little too much towards Elder Scrolls combat, and while it's not bad by any means, it's just a little basic, but since you can approach scenarios in many different ways, it's certainly not the end of the world. And since you're not forced into a combat grind for levels, it doesn't feel like a chore at any point. On top of that, there is more than enough here to make up for this one downside. I cannot compliment this game enough. The story, world, characters, and atmosphere all exude this uncomfortable aura that really makes you feel like you're in a completely different world. The low poly look here works because it's meant to feel foreign. You're meant to feel a sense of discomfort in existing because your character does. Dread Delusion is, at least so far, my game of the year, which is why I put it first on this list because I want everyone to know about it. So if it sounds like a game you would be interested in, it more than likely will be for you. Arctic Eggs is a game I first saw on Twitter, which has become a valuable resource of cool games for me lately after Wizardwhat put out his video on the subject. In all my searching across different games, Arctic Eggs really stood out to me. Why is someone frying eggs with bullets? It's a question strong enough to get me to buy a game right on the spot. The only way I can describe it is it's just vibes. It is deeply bleak, but uses that tone to catch you off guard with some truly humorous moments and character interactions rarely seen in games. The mechanical basis of Arctic eggs is cooking, but in kind of a scuffed way. You hold a frying pan and cook whatever character you talk to drops into it, requiring constant movement to cook through and flipped when one side is done, managing different times to cook with the balance required to keep everything in place. It's equal parts stressful and goofy, but nailing a dish is so absolutely satisfying. It feels good whenever you complete a fry-up. The simplicity of the game's mechanics are one of its biggest strengths. It's very easy to pick up, but difficult to master, and every new item dropped on your pan is a very quick moment of, oh god, what do I do? Before it soon makes sense. Nothing ever feels unfair, it's just you fighting physics and whatever is on the menu. Keeping the game streamlined to just flipping, rather than adding in upgrades or abilities into the mix, was a great decision on the developer Water Museum's part. It removes any kind of optimal strategy from emerging. Rather, it relies on how you handle the mounting pressure of not spilling a beer, keeping ice cubes from melting, or burning a cigarette so long it goes down to the butt. Like I said, this game is just vibes, and it is its biggest strength and the reason I love it so much. A desolate future made barren by snow, everyone standing around conversing. There is this feeling of oppression that is strewn through not only the architecture but also the story. Every new person you find will give you an insight into something, either their own life and feelings or what's happening, sometimes both. As the poultry peddler of the people, the one who cooks the eggs, people seem to open up to you more and more. While there are a few threads that you can follow as you unlock more areas, most of the time you are getting vignettes into the lives of these snow-ridden inhabitants, with oftentimes incredible one-liners. Every character is incredibly quotable. I've taken so many screenshots of things people have said because I just need to keep them to look at sometimes. There isn't too much more I can say about Arctic eggs before I just give everything away right here, but I will leave on the note that I have never played a game that just got it. Something that got the vibe I absolutely love. Cutouts of conversations that reflect me and how I feel, at least some of them do. And for that, I am thankful to this silly frozen egg cooking game for, as I said, getting it. If I could sum up 1000 Resist in 2 words, it would be emotionally compromising. Every single time I finished a chapter, I would be sat staring at my screen for a little while, just soaking in what had happened, before working up the grit to continue. 1000 Resist feels like a game that should be absolutely massive, and it kind of sucks to include it in a video like this since more people should have played it. However, it is a difficult game to talk about in a format such as this without spoiling it, because it is kind of one of those the less you know the better experiences. So if this slight opening has you convinced, feel free to skip ahead to the next game. Otherwise, let me tell you a few things about it while giving away as little as possible. You play as Watcher, a cloned sister of the All-Mother, assigned the function to dig through memories as a mean to understand the past. I know that might sound a little confusing, and that's because it is. 1000 Resist throws you headfirst into its story without any priming. It opens with a bang, then slowly unravels itself as you maneuver your way through its intricate world. The basic rundown is there was an incident involving otherworldly entities called the Occupants, and they caused all of humanity to fall deathly ill except for a high school girl named Iris, who later became the All-Mother in the current time. It is your function as Watcher to go through her memories, learn all you can, and bring about trust to be granted immunity from the disease wrought onto Earth. This is all stuff laid out over the course of chapter 1, so while there is obviously a lot more that goes on, the mystery never falters. It manages to stay incredibly gripping and heartbreaking all the same as each chapter closes. It's interesting playing a game like this which is clearly inspired by the events of 2020 and beyond. Lockdown hit us all in different ways, and while a lot of art has been made in the time since the global pandemic, video games are obviously a little slower to make, and this is the first one I've played that is clearly a reflection of those events. While I wasn't in high school at the time, the overall feeling of isolation, reliance on masks, weird new ways in which we must navigate life, seeing people get sick and not knowing what that means, are all intensely relatable feelings. For anyone who took it as seriously as it should have been, it was scary new ground, and those anxieties are deeply reflected in 1000 Resist. It's unrelenting in its want to show the collective trauma of the time. The game also deals with the trauma of immigration. However, since I only ever moved between Australia and New Zealand, and that did suck for me at the time, our cultures are similar enough it never felt that bad in hindsight. So I cannot speak on how those themes are handled here, but as a relative outsider, it's still gut-wrenching to watch a teenager figure out what it means to live a life without her parents. Parents who are too old school for the current day but want everything for their daughter. The threads that 1000 Resist navigates are vast. A futuristic sci-fi game about a world-ending virus, wrapped around generational and immigration trauma, but developers Sunset Visitor walk the tightrope perfectly, while also managing to pull the rug out from under the player constantly in a neo-noir thriller. The game's mechanical density is fairly non-existent, however that doesn't say anything to how it feels to play. You are, literally and figuratively, a watcher. You walk around spaces taking in new information constantly, as much or as little as you would like to. Whoever was in charge of cinematography is an absolute genius. The same goes for the voice acting. While not everyone has top quality line delivery, most do, in a fashion far more impressive than a lot of AAA games. Which, on that note, it is wild that this game is fully voice acted, an astounding feat for a small indie studio. This game should be absolutely massive. I wish I didn't have to talk about it here. Go Mecha Ball opens with a cutscene about how the characters just want to have fun, and that is the perfect introduction to this game. It is just fun. The idea of fun missing from video games is a very weird thing for me to say. It's not something I entirely believe, obviously. I wouldn't play games if I didn't derive some enjoyment from them, usually in the form of fun. That said, the idea of something being purely distilled down to be fun, rather than a challenge to overcome or a tense story to uncover, is refreshing for me personally. From top to bottom, all Go Mecha Ball has set out to achieve is that one goal, and it absolutely delivers on that promise in spades. It's a twin-stick shooter where you play as a little robot that can morph into a ball who rolls around. When you're in a ball, you press attack to bash into enemies on a cooldown. Out of the ball, you have a gun you can shoot, all on an isometric plane with some roguelite elements with a heavy emphasis on the light. The big thing that makes Go Mecha Ball stick out to me though is its verticality. Using an isometric plane rarely gives way to vertical movement, but here is very much a part of the core gameplay loop. Moving around layers almost in part feels like an old Micro Machines racing game, using height to get the drop on enemies or to escape them. There isn't much here to ruin your flow. From what I can gather, the levels are not randomized, but the order you will see them within each biome is, as are the enemy spawns, I think. It's hard to tell, this game is so chaotic and throws so much at you, I wasn't really keeping track. But the rogue elements come in with buffs after each successful level, granting increased damage, health, and so on. The progression system is extremely streamlined to make way for the fun and chaos. It's straight to the point, which is something I deeply respect. Each stage is broken up into 3 waves, each biome is broken up into 3 levels before a boss, and before each boss is a shop where you can spend coins accumulated on upgrades or putting towards a new character to unlock. Honestly, this game has sort of made me realize what we've lost with the rise of roguelike and roguelite genres. The arcade style of progression is something I didn't know I missed. You know what's coming with each boss, and while the levels are on a rotation, it reminds me of spending way too many coins mastering old arcade cabinets. Each successful victory, the difficulty ramps up hard. So while I was able to actually beat the game pretty quickly, when I made it to the next difficulty setting, it was a struggle to beat the first boss, who I never lost to once prior. Go Mecha Ball walks a very fine line. It has a lot going on at once, but it never feels too overwhelming. The pinball mechanics keep the flow going at a nice pace. Pads littered around levels can send you flying or give you a boost to ensure momentum never really dies unless you want it to. The depth cannot be underestimated. It's not the most dense game I've ever played, but it reminds me of Star Fox 64 in a way. There's a few little tricks you can do, such as interrupting attacks, as well as an old school arcadey combo mechanic that mix very well in delivering something that is deep enough to justify the amount of replays you need to be sinking in to unlock everything. With a good price of entry, Go Mecha Ball is hard to complain about. However, there is one thing that bothered me about my experience, and it's not a big deal, but it is something I want to talk about because it would be such a fantastic addition. Between the shop and the boss, there are pseudo-platformer sections that utilize most of the marble and pinball ideas. I would love to have more of this. Minimal or even no enemies, just fun platforming sections. It doesn't have to be the main focus, but a time trial or endless mode to some extent would be incredible. However, for the cost, I can't complain too hard. It's just something I couldn't shake every stretch before a boss. With all that said, this is such an easy recommendation for anyone who needs something in their library that's a quick pick up and play game to chuck on for a run whenever they get the itch. Okay, so this might be the hardest sell to people who didn't grow up on absurdist British television, but I'm going to try and sell you Thank Goodness You're Here anyway. Set in the made-up town of Barnsworth, a place that emulates the lower-income working-class villages of Britain, this completely hand-drawn comedy slatformer, as the developers have coined, it takes you on the journey of a lifetime filled to the brim with little references to the home country. A lot of these I was able to clock, but there's so many that even I, someone who lives in a Commonwealth country raised on British TV, couldn't even notice because that's not where I'm from. For someone like me who knows a lot of Britishisms and references, there's a lot of missing representation for media from the north. So a lot of the Yorkshireness of it all was refreshing to see outside of my only real exposure to the region, which is some contestants on Love Island.
That I like sucked her tits or whatever.
Playing out much like a sketch TV show, you control a little yellow fella, helping the townsfolk in increasingly bizarre situations using only a jump and a slap button, hence the self-appointed name. You walk around slapping and jumping on all items around Barnsworth, trying to see what it is you need to do to move things forward, broken up into little vignettes. Much like a sketch show, there isn't really an overarching plot, more so just constant setups for situational bits and jokes, most of which are very British, which is why this feels like kind of a hard sell to anyone not familiar with that style of comedy, but I truly believe even if you only get like half the jokes, this will be well worth your time and could potentially open you up to more things like it in the future, such as the fast show Little Britain and the Mighty Boosh. There's this idea that not only just games, but a lot of media needs to be as mass appealing as possible. Even indie games do attempt this to some degree. There's a net that, in quotes, should be cast to reach as many people as possible, because if you don't, your game will probably fail. And I think Thank Goodness You're Here proves that just isn't true. I live on the exact other side of the world to the north of England, and this game hit me in a way few have. There's something so inviting about being a tourist for a place I may never visit, or at least if I do, getting to see a side of it I will probably never know. One thing I will say is the length of the game may be off-putting, but let me offer some counterpoints. First of all, expecting any British comedy show to be long in any regard is setting yourself up for failure. But considering this is a 3-ish hour game priced at 16 USD, that is a steal in my eyes for what you're getting. A completely hand-drawn, fully voice-acted, including the talented Matt Berry, and an almost entirely interactable town packed with jokes. It's a good bargain that's more than worth the cost of entry. In fact, there is so much to do in Thank Goodness You're Here. In my time with it, I slapped just about everything I saw and did almost everything I thought was available to me, but still walked away missing 12 achievements. It's just that dense with things to do. I don't think Thank Goodness You're Here will land comedically for everyone the entire way through, but I do genuinely think it's got enough genius and heart in it to impress just about anyone who plays it. Despite its density, I don't want to spoil too much from the experience, leaving it as fresh as possible for those wanting to take the plunge. This is a fantastic afternoon pick up and play whose praises I can't sing enough of, but can't talk about too in depth lest I ruin some punchlines. So the more people that see credits, the more people I can talk to about it. Just make sure you don't play in local dialect if you have no idea what that means. And with that, there's a bunch of games you maybe haven't played. What are some indies you think slipped under the radar and deserve more attention? And if you like this video and want to see more from me in the future, please like, subscribe, all that. Okay, I will see you next time.